Red and blue lights flashed across the tarmac as two uniformed officers shoved a young black woman against the hood of their cruiser, her wrists already bound in cold steel. The roar of a private jet's engines hummed in the distance, but the real noise came from their raised voices. "ID, now! What are you doing near this jet?" one barked. She didn't struggle. She didn't shout. Her silence was louder than their accusations. Her gaze, fixed straight ahead, was steady, almost like she knew something they didn't. Around them, a few people watched from behind tinted windows. Others slowly raised their phones. She stood there, cuffed and composed, as if this moment wasn't the end, but the beginning. Voiceover. They thought she was trespassing. They had no idea who she was. Tell us where you're watching from, because what happens next turns this airport upside down. Ava Sinclair didn't need a title to be recognized. Her presence alone was enough. At just 26, she was the youngest executive in her family's billion-dollar logistics empire. Calm, elegant, and sharply intelligent, Ava carried herself with quiet authority. She never chased cameras or headlines. While others flaunted power, she built hers in silence, brick by brick. Her tailored black suit mirrored her focus. Minimalist, precise, unapologetic. She had just landed at the private terminal for a high-level logistics conference, one where she was set to be the keynote speaker. No flashing lights, no fanfare. Just a woman stepping off her family's jet, ready to walk straight into the boardroom. But before she could reach the terminal doors, two police officers stepped in her path. Officers Dalton and Riley, both nearing 50, both known across regional precincts for their strict enforcement, which too often veiled their pattern of racial profiling. They had a reputation for acting first, explaining later, and for people like Ava, they rarely bothered explaining at all. She barely had time to breathe in the cool runway air before they approached her, eyes already narrowed, assumptions already made. To them, she wasn't a CEO, a guest speaker, or the owner of the jet she had just exited. She was just a young black woman walking where, in their minds, she didn't belong. And as they positioned themselves to block her path, Ava remained composed. She had dealt with this energy before. What they didn't know, what they would soon learn, is that she wasn't just passing through this space. She owned a piece of it. "You're not authorized to be here," Officer Dalton snapped, stepping directly into Ava's path as she made her way from the plane to the terminal. His tone wasn't inquisitive. It was accusatory. Officer Riley flanked her left side, hand hovering near his belt, eyes already scanning her up and down like a threat. Ava stopped, calm but alert. "I'm attending the summit for global logistics," she said, her voice even. "I just landed from our Chicago office." She reached into her blazer pocket slowly and pulled out her ID badge, an executive clearance card with her name, title, and company logo embossed in silver. They barely glanced at it. Riley scoffed. "Nice fake badge. You people are creative." Dalton stepped closer. "You think walking off a private jet gives you the right to stroll through a restricted runway? Who paid for your ride?" His voice dripped with implication, as if the idea of her earning any of it was beyond logic. Ava didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Still, her grip on the badge tightened slightly. "That jet belongs to my family's company," she said. "I'm Ava Sinclair. You can verify." But they didn't want verification. They wanted dominance. Before she could finish, Dalton spun her around and slapped cold handcuffs onto her wrists. "You're being detained for attempting to access a restricted zone without proper credentials. he barked, ignoring the gleaming aircraft behind them bearing her family's insignia. Ava didn't resist. She didn't shout. She simply stared, straight ahead as her arms were pulled behind her. Her silence wasn't submission. It was restraint. From the far side of the tarmac, a private jet pilot watched the scene unfold with visible discomfort. His mouth parted in disbelief as he recognized Ava from previous flights. She was no trespasser. Frantically, he pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number, her family's head of security. Meanwhile, inside the terminal and around the private hangar, people had begun to take notice. A cluster of staff, executives, and other travelers stood frozen at the windows. Then came the phones. Screens lit up, recording the spectacle of a young black woman in designer heels being cuffed on her own company's runway. Murmurs spread. Gasps. A low ripple of, "What's going on?" passed from one guest to another. And Ava. She stood tall despite the cuffs, despite the stares. She knew something they didn't. Justice was already on its way. The sound of screeching tires broke through the murmurs just as the runway's tension peaked. A sleek, black SUV, windows tinted and engine growling with urgency, pulled up beside the police cruiser. Doors flew open, and out stepped two agents. In full tactical black, FBI security detail. Their expressions were unreadable, but their pace was sharp and deliberate. One of them spotted Ava immediately and froze mid-step, eyes narrowing on the cuffs locked around her wrists. "Ms. Sinclair," the lead agent said as he approached, ignoring the officers completely. Ava nodded, calm as ever. That was all the confirmation they needed. Without hesitation, the agent turned to Officers Dalton and Riley. "Uncuff her, now." Dalton hesitated. "Excuse me." The agent stepped forward, voice low but commanding. "You just detained the CEO of Skyroute International, the woman whose name is on half the logistics contracts you move through this airport. The same woman you didn't even bother to verify before throwing into cuffs like a criminal." Riley blinked. We didn't know." "I didn't." "Ask what you knew," the agent snapped. Dalton fumbled for the keys, suddenly pale. His hands trembled as he unlocked the cuffs, and Ava's wrists came free with a metallic click. She flexed her fingers gently, her face emotionless, her back straight. She didn't rub the marks, didn't react. Instead, she looked up at them, her gaze cutting cleaner than any outburst ever could. "This is what you call protocol?" she asked quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. It was surgical, direct, disarming. The agents flanked her as she turned away from the cruiser and began walking back toward the jet. Her stride was measured, heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome of control. The gathered crowd at the terminal watched in stunned silence. Phones still raised but no longer recording out of shock, now out of awe. One of the pilots from the hangar stepped forward and gave a small, respectful nod. Another worker lowered his phone and whispered, "She's the one who runs Skyroute?" The whispers rippled outward, replacing judgment with admiration. As Ava ascended the steps toward the jet, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. The damage was already done, not to her reputation but to theirs. The ones who judged, the ones who assumed, now stood in the very spotlight they tried to shine on her. And as the FBI opened the door and ushered her inside, she vanished behind the tinted glass with all the grace of someone who never needed to prove anything, only remind the world who she already was. By the next morning, the entire internet knew her name. The footage, officers cuffing a poised young black woman beside a private jet had exploded across social media within hours. Millions watched in stunned silence as Ava Sinclair stood composed while the cuffs clicked into place. And millions more watched her walk away with her head held higher than ever as federal agents escorted her with respect. The hashtags came quickly, each more powerful than the last. You, Ava Sinclair, Ixu Justice. In the runway, Ix Black Excellence Denied. Celebrities reposted it. Activists demanded accountability. The world wanted a statement, but Ava gave none. Instead, she posted a single photo to her verified profile. No caption, no explanation. It showed her mid-stride on the runway, walking past officers Dalton and Riley, head held high, the cuffs already removed. In the background, the agents trailed behind her, and the very jet she owned shimmered under golden afternoon light. It was quiet, poetic, and louder than any press conference could have ever been. While the world debated who she was, who the officers were, and what consequences should follow, a twist unraveled behind the scenes, one only a few insiders knew. Days before the incident, Ava Sinclair had secured a major federal contract through her company Skyroute International. The initiative, a nationwide anti-discrimination audit focused on law enforcement agencies operating in high-security transportation zones, beginning with private airport police units. She hadn't just landed to attend a conference. She was there to oversee her first round of evaluations. The irony wasn't lost on her, or anyone in her circle. The very officers who judged her, restrained her, humiliated her without question, were about to be placed under her jurisdiction for review. They hadn't profiled a random stranger. They'd profiled their evaluator, a woman trained not just in leadership, but in justice. A woman who didn't need revenge because she already held the pen that would write the policy. Ava remained silent. The world didn't need her to speak. Her walk, her photo, and now her role were saying everything. For her. Within days of the incident, the fallout was swift and irreversible. Officers Dalton and Riley were suspended without pay, pending a full internal investigation. Their history, once buried under layers of departmental excuses and paperwork, was now wide open for scrutiny. Dozens of previous complaints resurfaced. Testimonies began pouring in from civilians who had stayed silent for years, finally finding the courage through Ava's viral moment. The department released a formal statement citing a failure to follow standard verification protocol. But the world saw it for what it truly was. Another example of authority misused, of assumptions weaponized against dignity. Ava Sinclair, however, did not hold a press conference. She did not appear on talk shows or issue emotional monologues. On social media, she didn't need to. Her presence was power enough. While news outlets dissected every second of the footage, while headlines screamed for justice and hashtags climbed into the millions, Ava quietly shifted her focus from the fallout to the future. From her corner office overlooking the skyline, Ava met with her board and proposed something unprecedented: the Skyroute Justice Fellowship, a long-term grant and mentorship program dedicated to empowering young black women to enter fields of law enforcement, criminal justice, and public policy. She wanted to give them the education, resources, and support that could reshape a system from the inside. "We don't just need more representation," she said softly during the announcement. "We need reformers who understand the pain, who've lived through the silence, and who are unafraid to lead with compassion and discipline. The grant was seeded with an initial $5 million donation, personally matched by Ava's own contribution. The initiative partnered with law schools, public safety programs, and local advocacy networks. Within weeks, applications flooded in. Women from underrepresented communities, many who had once been profiled or dismissed themselves, now saw a door that had never been opened before. But Ava didn't stop there. 3 weeks after the incident, she returned to the same airport where it all began, the same tarmac, the same terminal. But this time, nothing about her arrival was the same. Her jet touched down under a golden morning sky. As the steps extended, Ava descended with quiet grace. Waiting for her at the bottom were the airport's director, the new head of security, and several senior staff members. Their posture was different now, not performative but grounded in genuine respect. The director stepped forward, his voice soft but certain. "Miss Sinclair, welcome back. We're honored to have you." Ava shook his hand with a composed nod. "Thank you. I hope today looks different than the last." They nodded. It already did. She walked through the terminal flanked not by guards but by dignity. Travelers looked, up from their coffee cups and phones, some recognizing her instantly. Staff greeted her with a reverent calm. Her heels echoed across the polished floor, each step heavier with meaning than the last. Then, near Gate 3, it happened. A little girl sat cross-legged beside her mother, a backpack shaped like a unicorn resting on her lap. She tugged her mom's sleeve and pointed toward Ava, her eyes wide. "That's her," she whispered, barely loud enough to carry. "That's the one who stood tall." Ava heard it. She turned, met the girl's gaze, and offered a soft, knowing smile. The kind of smile that said, "I see you. I was you." She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. In that one moment, more was said than speeches could ever hold. She continued walking, the world watching her not for what she endured, but for how she responded. She hadn't just endured injustice. She had transformed it. The very place that once shackled her with ignorance now stood as proof that dignity, once claimed, can never be taken again. And as she disappeared into the glass-walled conference room overlooking the runway, the city behind her rising high and proud, Ava Sinclair reminded everyone that real justice is not a roar. It's a quiet, unshakable truth that keeps walking forward and invites others to follow. They saw cuffs. She wore a crown. In a world quick to judge by color, clothing, or presence, Ava Sinclair stood as a quiet reckoning, a reminder that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the loudest or the one in uniform. It's the one who doesn't flinch when falsely accused, the one who stands tall when others try to shrink them. Have you ever been judged for simply existing in a space someone thought you didn't deserve? For walking confidently where others expected you to bow? Real power doesn't panic. It doesn't scream for attention. It walks through fire without blinking, because it knows the truth doesn't need to be shouted to be seen. Ava didn't need revenge. She didn't need headlines. She let dignity do the talking. Like, share, and follow for more true justice stories that prove silence doesn't mean weakness. Because sometimes karma shows up in heels and walks away without a word.